So oftentimes on the show, I try to talk about incentives, and that's an important piece of context that is almost always left out of corporate media discussions on various issues, when they even bother to talk about issues that are important and should be discussed. Well, here's a perfect example of a poor incentive structure. Syria airstrikes instantly added nearly $5 billion to missile makers' stock value. That's almost beyond parody. You know, I'm sure The Onion has in the past or will at some point in the near future write an article that kind of illuminates the fundamental absurdity of having a system that works like this. You know, so for example, when we talk about the military, everybody understands that, well, that's something you can't privatize the military, because then that's a mercenary army, and who the fuck are they beholden to? You can have people fighting wars for profit in a way that's above and beyond even what goes on now. Prisons are another thing. We have private prisons, but most reasonable people understand that's a giant perversion of justice, because the reality is, if you make money from locking people up, then lobbyists, private prison lobbyists, are going to try to make more things illegal to lock more people up to make more money. So these are incentive structure problems. But now, you know, fucking waging offensive wars on countries that didn't attack us are massively beneficial to some people. And what the military-industrial complex did, and boy was this a clever trick, is they made it so that military goods are made in every state. 50 out of 50 states have jobs tied to the military-industrial complex. Tanks are made in some states, or parts of tanks are made in some states, and then also in other states, and then other ones make the fucking Kevlar vests, and then other ones make, you know, the fighter jets, and then other ones make the drones, and then the other ones make the engines that go in the drones. And so what you've done is you've created an incentive where even otherwise well-meaning Democratic senators who might be against war in casual conversation, but when push comes to shove and that vote comes up to make the next generation of drones where the fucking engine parts are made in their state and there's a factory that's got 300 jobs tied to it, he doesn't want to piss off his own constituents. So, okay, war is bad, but, you know, hey, my project, I got jobs tied to this. What am I going to do? I got to vote for it. And there's been stories about how there's hundreds of tanks or maybe even thousands of tanks sitting in the Nevada desert because, you know, you had... Even the Pentagon was like, we don't need these tanks. But because of the corruption and the lobbyists buying the politicians were like, okay, but we're going to pass this bill that creates hundreds or thousands more tanks anyway. And listen, Raytheon, their stock went up. Boeing, their stock went up. Lockheed Martin, their stock went up. Northrop Grumman, their stock went up. General Dynamics. All of the military-industrial complex stocks rose as the rest of the market floundered. Look, it strikes me that when it comes to weapons of war, it shouldn't be private companies that make the weapons of war. That should be illegal. It should be the government. Because then at least you put a brake on the profit motive and the incentive structure. You know, lobbyists. How the fuck do we have a system where you work for a company that makes machines of death and you get to lobby the government to make more machines of death, therefore making it more likely we got to find more conflicts to use said machines of death? I mean, I know this is a little complicated and you got to draw the lines here for people, but at the end of the day, who can deny that this is what's happening right now? I mean, we're bombing 8 different countries. Is anybody going to sit there and tell us that Somalia is a direct threat to the United States? Syria is a direct threat to the... Of course not. Fucking of course not. But we've just inherited this... No, we're the world police. That's what we are. So we have to do this because it's morality and stuff and freedom, human rights. Well, again, I hate to keep bringing these points up, but you have to. People accuse the show of being repetitive. Guilty. Because the issues are the same. They haven't changed. We're still arming the apartheid state doing illegal occupation, Israel. We're still arming Saudi Arabia as they massacre women and children and starve Yemen to death and make it so people have fucking cholera there, a preventable disease. But they have cholera because they're blockading the country, they're not allowing in food. People are starving to death. So I point these things out because they're true. As we're committing atrocities, we're also... The idea, Jill Stein pointed this out. You want to stop terrorism? Stop selling weapons all around the world to fucking dictatorships and theocracies. We support 73% of the world's dictatorships. What would the world look like in 5 years if we cut off all arms flows to countries that have terrible human rights records? What would it look like? We no longer arm Israel. We no longer arm Saudi Arabia. We no longer arm sketchy rebel groups that are jihadists in Syria. What would happen? You know what would happen? Fucking terrorism would drop probably over 50% if we stopped arming fucking terrorists. But no, you're not allowed to discuss that because then that's hippy-dippy far-left stuff, you know? You're not allowed to discuss, hey, maybe we get rid of the profit motive in the military-industrial complex, even though Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican president, warned about the military-industrial complex. You're not allowed to talk about that stuff. You know, you're only allowed to either be out and out for all the wars, or you're allowed to object on procedural grounds. You're allowed to say, you know, this bombing thing might be a great idea, but we should vote on it. That's the majority Democratic Party response. If they're not just flat out 20 Democratic senators were just in favor of Trump bombing Syria. But now you know, this is what happens. Hey, look at that, we bombed, and a lot of people are rich. This isn't an incentive to try to bomb more places. And by the way, the media too praises Trump nonstop when he bombs places. It's what happened last time he bombed the Syrian airbase. It's what happened this time. Syria, he's Syria's president. So the media praises the president when he does these bombings. He doesn't get congressional approval, even though that's unconstitutional. He's attacking a country that was not going to attack us. And a lot of people make a lot of money when we do bombings. It's almost like the perfect storm of continuing war forever and ever and ever and ever. Well, it's time to look in the mirror. It's time for a fucking reckoning and realize what we're doing to the world and what we're doing to ourselves and what we've become.